This is an ordinary day at a market in ancient Rome. Picture the scene. I am standing there naked, crushed between hundreds of other sweaty bodies. The water I'm sitting in hasn't been changed for weeks. Someone just scraped their dead skin into it. There is no soap anywhere. And that guy across from me? A few minutes ago he used the same sponge he now wipes his backside with. Yes, this is the famous public bath of ancient Rome, where the so-called peak of cleanliness was actually a bacteria-soaked nightmare that would shut down any modern business in 5 minutes. I'm about to ruin your pretty image of ancient civilization forever. If you have a weak stomach, you might want to close this page. But if you want the truth, hold on tight. And before we continue, hit like if you're ready, and subscribe so you don't miss our videos about ancient life your history teachers never told you about. Alright. Let me set the scene. Public baths, what the Romans called thermae, were incredibly popular. These weren't small neighborhood pools. They were massive architectural complexes. The baths of Caracalla could hold over 1,600 people at once. The baths of Diocletian? More than 3,000. They weren't just baths. They had gyms, libraries, gardens, massage rooms, and food stalls. Some even had brothels. You could spend time with a Roman prostitute and then go bathe, very convenient. People went every day. Rich, poor, senators, slaves, everyone mixed together. It was your gym, your spa, your cafe, and your business meeting, all in one steamy building. They even say Emperor Hadrian bathed with ordinary soldiers. Sounds wonderful, right? Like a peaceful, elegant place where everyone was equal. But here is the ugly truth. These baths were disgusting. Romans truly believed they were extremely clean. They were proud of their bathing culture. They mocked Germanic tribes as dirty barbarians partly because they had no public baths. Roman writers constantly praised bathing as a sign of health and civilization. But there was one thing they didn't understand: germs. Germ theory would not exist for another 1,500 years. They had no idea about bacteria, viruses, or tiny parasites. They couldn't see what was really living in that water. And believe me, it was full of life. So while Romans thought they were the cleanest people on earth, in reality they were bathing in a biological soup that would make a modern health inspector cry. Now walk with me into a typical Roman bath. First, I pay the entrance fee, usually cheap, sometimes free. On festival days I go into the appetitorium, the changing room. I leave my clothes in an unlocked cubby. Theft was common, so you just hoped no one took your things. Next, I cover myself in olive oil, lots of it. Why? Because Romans didn't use soap. They knew about soap, the Gauls and Germans used it, but Romans thought soap was barbaric. Oil was their idea of cleanliness. Here's how it worked. I covered myself in oil, then exercised or sat in the steam room until I started sweating. Sweat, dirt, and dead skin mixed with the oil into a nasty paste on my body. Then came the worst part. I scraped it all off with a metal tool called a strigil. Imagine a curved metal blade dragged across greasy, sweaty skin, scraping off this filthy mass into little strips of human waste. And where did that dirty mass go? Straight into the bath water. The same water everyone else was using. Rich people sometimes hired slaves to scrape them. Think about that job, help wanted, scrape oily skin sludge off naked rich people. But it gets worse. The water came from aqueducts, and honestly, that part was amazing engineering. They heated it with hypocausts, underground furnaces that pushed hot air under the floors. You moved from room to room with different temperatures. From there, I moved through the rooms in sequence. The tepidarium with warm water. The caldarium, where the water was so hot it steamed. And finally the frigidarium, filled with ice-cold water. Essentially, it was the Roman version of a sauna circuit. But here's the problem no one likes to talk about. That water was almost never fully drained. Some bath complexes went weeks, sometimes even months, without a complete water change. Yes, fresh water was added on top. But the old water? It just stayed there, collecting everything people left behind. Think about that for a moment. Hundreds of visitors every day. All the scraped off oil, sweat, and dead skin. No real filtration system. Almost no proper drainage. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii and other Roman cities shows that bathwater turned into stagnant, bacteria-filled sludge. One scientific study of ancient Roman pipes found thick layers of biofilm, proof that water sat still long enough for entire microbial ecosystems to develop. By modern standards, this was practically primordial muck. And the temperatures didn't help. Heating in these baths wasn't carefully regulated. The caldarium could reach dangerous levels, between 120 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, about 49 to 60 degrees Celsius. Romans treated this as a flex. People competed to see who could endure the hottest water the longest. Some paid the price. Pliny the Elder wrote about bathers who fainted, and sometimes died, from heat exhaustion. Now let's return to the oils for a moment. These weren't just pure olive oil. Many were heavily scented and mixed with chemical substances. Lead was common. Mercury was also used in skin treatments. So people were rubbing literal poison into their pores, then scraping it off, and dumping it straight into the communal water. A brilliant system. All right. We've covered the basics. Now we move on to the truly vile part. Ready? No? Too late. Let's start with the toilets. Most public baths had attached latrines. These were communal toilets where rows of people sat side by side, relieving themselves and chatting as if nothing unusual was happening. To Romans, this was perfectly normal social behavior. But here's the detail that matters. There was no toilet paper. Instead, they used something called a tessorium, also known as a xylospongium. It was a natural sea sponge attached to a stick. You wiped yourself with it, then rinsed it in a channel of water running along the floor. And that sponge? It was shared. That's right. A communal but sponge. Dozens of people used the same one throughout the day. Yes, it was rinsed between uses, but the rinse water often came from channels connected to the bath's water system. In some documented cases, those channels fed directly back into the bath complex. Picture that. You're relaxing peacefully in the frigidarium while nearby water flows past, fresh from washing shared toilet sponges. The Romans called this efficient water use. We would call it a public health nightmare. Now let's talk about urine. Romans collected it, intentionally. There were public urinals where full ones, essentially ancient dry cleaners, gathered urine to wash clothes. Why? Because urine contains ammonia, which works as a cleaning and whitening agent. This was so profitable that Emperor Vespasian imposed a tax on urine collection. When his son complained that taxing urine was disgusting, Vespasian held up a gold coin and said, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't stink. That phrase is still used today. But urine didn't just end up in laundries. It also ended up in the baths. People regularly urinated in the pools. The poet Martial openly complained about it. In one of his epigrams, he essentially says, "You avoid the baths because you know people piss in them." Some Romans even believed urine had medicinal properties. So yes, some people urinated in the water deliberately, convinced it was healthy. Now let's shrink the scale to the microscopic level. Modern studies of Roman sewers and latrines have uncovered parasites that make your skin crawl. Roundworms, tapeworms, whipworms, liver flukes. They were everywhere. One study of a Roman latrine pit in York, England, found eggs of the fish tapeworm, a parasite contracted by eating raw or undercooked fish. And here's the truly unsettling part. Some Roman baths kept fish in the pools. Partly for decoration. Partly because people believed the fish would nibble dead skin off their feet, an ancient pedicure. So now you have fish, potential parasite carriers, swimming in the same water you're bathing in. And we haven't even talked about lice. The changing rooms were infested. Lice, fleas, bed bugs, perfect conditions for infestation, piles of clothing, warm air, and an endless flow of people. That civilized Roman bath? It was absolutely teeming with life. By the way, many Roman writers complained about all of this. Martial joked that fleas in the baths jumped like trained acrobats. Another author described lice marching along the benches like organized soldiers. And remember, bathers moved constantly between cold, warm, and hot pools. And warm water? It was paradise for bacteria. Warm enough for rapid growth, but not hot enough to kill anything. Staphylococcus, streptococcus, and countless other microbes thrived there. Skin infections were everywhere. Athlete's foot is named after athletes, but Romans had its primitive version, bathhouse foot. Eye infections spread rapidly. Trachoma, a bacterial eye disease that can lead to blindness, was common in Rome. Cassius Dio wrote that several emperors suffered from chronic eye problems, likely contracted in public baths. And then there were venereal diseases. Baths were perfect breeding grounds for them. Syphilis, gonorrhea. Close contact, shared water, and a constant stream of bodies created ideal conditions for transmission. Some bath complexes were effectively disease incubators, just dressed up with marble columns and statues. And this is where things get even darker. Roman baths were not always safe places. Assaults happened, especially against slaves and people of lower social status who had little protection. Some emperors, yes, I'm looking at you, Tiberius, were rumored to use baths for deeply disturbing purposes that I won't even go into here. Violence was common. People were robbed. People were beaten. Sometimes people were even killed. The changing rooms were notorious for theft. Seneca, who lived above a bathhouse, constantly complained about the noise. Shouting. Arguments. Massazes. Armpit hair plucking, yes, that was a real service. It was loud, chaotic, and relentless. So what were the real health consequences? Historical evidence paints a fairly clear picture. Public baths were excellent vectors for disease. Typhus. Dysentery. Cholera. All of these waterborne illnesses spread easily in such conditions. The Antonine Plague of the 2nd century AD, which killed millions across the empire, likely spread faster because of bath culture. People continued going even while sick, because bathing was so deeply embedded in daily life. Even Galen, the most famous physician of ancient Rome, warned against this. He noted that people who bathed too frequently or stayed too long often fell ill. But his advice was mostly ignored. Baths weren't just a habit. They were part of Roman identity. And here's the irony. Romans considered so-called barbarian tribes dirty because they lacked public baths. Yet those barbarians, who bathed in cold rivers and streams, were probably cleaner. They weren't soaking in other people's filth. Some Germanic tribes practiced daily cold water bathing. Uncomfortable, yes, but far more hygienic than sharing a warm bacterial soup with hundreds of strangers. Some historians even suggest that bath culture played a small role in Rome's decline. Not a primary cause, that would be too simplistic, but one contributing factor. Chronic illness, parasites, and repeated infections over generations weakened the population. And then there was lead. Lead pipes. Lead-based cosmetics used in baths. Lead poisoning causes cognitive impairment, aggression, and infertility, not ideal traits for sustaining an empire. The upper classes suffered the most, because they bathed most often and used the most cosmetics. Now, to be fair, no one understood germ theory back then. Romans weren't stupid. They acted logically based on the knowledge they had. They knew filth was bad. They understood that exercise and sweating were beneficial. Their engineering, aqueducts, hypocausts, drainage systems, was genuinely impressive and shaped architecture for centuries. Socially, baths also had real benefits. Regular interaction. Stress relief. Physical activity. Modern saunas and spas still rely on the same basic principles. Romans simply didn't understand microbiology. They had no way to stop disease transmission. Modern spas, pools, and hot tubs are direct descendants of Roman baths. The difference is that over the last 2,000 years, we've learned a few things. We use filtration, chlorine, regular water replacement, sanitation standards. We have soap. We have personal towels. And we don't share but sponges. Thank God. But here's the sobering truth. Even today, public pools and hot tubs can be dangerous if poorly maintained. Hot tub rash is real, caused by Pseudomonas bacteria. Legionnaire's disease can also spread through neglected spa systems. So we haven't completely escaped the problems Romans faced. We've just reduced them. Next time you walk into a crowded gym locker room, or grab a towel that's still warm from the last person, pause for a second. Now imagine that same space without soap. Without disinfectants. Without any understanding of germs. And hundreds of bodies passing through it every day. That was everyday life in ancient Rome. Suddenly, our modern standards don't seem so fragile. Here's the truth about Roman public baths: they were disgusting. They were fascinating. And they were genuinely unsettling. They weren't just about cleanliness. They were massive social experiments, places where tradition and community flourished, even as public health quietly deteriorated. Before science could keep up, the risks were invisible. But to be fair, Romans weren't careless or foolish. They operated with the best knowledge available to them. They valued hygiene, health, and social connection. They simply couldn't understand what they couldn't see. And that's the real takeaway. Every civilization has blind spots. Things that feel normal. Things that feel progressive. Until one day, people in the future look back and ask, wait, they did that and thought it was fine. Leave a comment and tell me, what do you think our blind spots are today? What things we do daily might future generations look back on with disbelief? If this story grabbed you, hit like, it's the easiest way to support the channel. And be sure to subscribe, because many more deep dives into the strange, uncomfortable, and eye-opening realities of the ancient world are coming. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.